Hello everybody, Keith here again. I'm going to try and get as much done as I can before I've got to go out. There's two things I want to do today. I want to look at some things that I'm quite chuffed about, and then I want to start to repot my Pleiones. Now these will be the bulbs that I bought last year and which I've overwintered in the fridge. But first, things to get excited about. Spring is springing out all over, or busting out all over the old, it was June, wasn't it? It was busting out all over, but nevertheless I think spring is. This is a keiki from Dendrobium Harmona Lake Kumi, which I got at last year's Bournemouth Orchid Society show. It came as a freebie. I bought Frosty Dawn and they gave me one of these as well, and it grew a keiki, and I repotted that on the 24th of September. Now that means it's been knocking on 6 months now, and in that time it hasn't grown in the surface at all, but you can see very clearly there's quite a lot of roots have gone down into this seedling compost. We've got roots, some roots up at the top there, but basically we've got roots all the way down. So it's probably getting ready to come out of this seedling stuff, although I have got some bark in the bottom, so it's getting some drainage, so that's not too bad. But the thing I was really pleased to see when I went looking yesterday, when I was doing some watering, is right at the back here there is a little tiny new growth, not very big yet, but it's there, so that is really nice to have. This one is the one I used to think was Sturbic Red, and now I'm fairly sure it's in line with the one Roger's got, Alisara Marfitch Renaissance Coral. Now this one put out a very odd new growth last year, which split into two, and they were growing quite well, and then all of a sudden they just rotted off at the base. So on the grounds that there might well be something wrong with it, or the compost wasn't suiting it, I repotted it a little while ago, not very long ago at all now. But we've got another new growth just there, so that's great. That's growing quite noticeably. This is the plant that I got last month in the raffle at the East Midlands Orchid Society. Looking at the picture on the front, I am fairly sure that this is going to end up being another Alisara Marfitch Renaissance Coral, which is not bad because it's a beautiful plant when all said and done. But it was in a real state. The pseudo bulbs were shriveled. I think this is one somebody had managed to catch from a garden centre for not a lot of money to go into the raffle, and it was catch as catch can. I mean, I've got I paid about £1 a strip or £2 a strip or something for the 5 raffle tickets, and I got this. So if it lived or died, I hadn't actually lost a lot of money either way. Now it's in this horrible peaty stuff, which I don't like at all, but I was going to repot it, said so on Roger Frampton's Facebook group, and Martin Spiker said don't. Yes, it'll want repotting, but if you repot it now, as like as not the roots are going to die and you're going to end up with a weak plant that hasn't got the strength to do anything about it. Wait until you've got a new growth, and as soon as that new growth is a decent size, give it some welly. Well, I was cleaning away more of this stuff from around the base of these pseudo bulbs. You can see there really that it was piled right up, it really was. So I was sort of smoothing it away from the base to try and stop this damp doing any serious damage, and when I was doing that the other day I really don't know how you're going to see that, but there is a little tiny new growth just showing its nose. So for a plant that was in a horrible state a month ago, this is starting some kind of a turnaround. Now, I mentioned it before, it's definitely happening now. You can see a change of colour and a very definite change of state, especially on this one. If you look at that, you can see how the base is much rounder, much wider than it does appear at the top, and you can see here how the wrinkles are beginning to disappear. So there are some working roots in that, and we've got a new growth. So fingers crossed that's going to work for me. So I'm going to turn it off, put these plants back, and then we'll have a look at potting up the first of these Pleiones. Right, back again then, and let's have a look at the main part of the programme. I grew the first group of Pleiones that I got last year in this pot. Those were supposed to be 3 different hybrids. I got those from Thompson and Morgan, and in the end I don't think they were. I think they were all a very well-known hybrid called Tongariro. But whatever they were supposed to be, they were supposed to be 2 Tongariro, 2 Rossini, 2 Vivaldis. They grew very well, and I had them in this. I had some stuff in the bottom to give it plenty of drainage, make sure it goes through, so lots of this bark going in, a couple of good handfuls at least. 3 in fact. I'm going to have to contact Burnham and get them to get me some more bark, I think. Right, so we'll start with that. You don't need vast amounts of compost or anything with Pleiones. They don't need it. They're quite shallow rooted, but the roots are long. They can be very, very long indeed. Now, Richard, the guy in our society, the East Midlands Orchid Society, who used to grow these things commercially, grows them in seed trays. He still grows some. He grows them in seed trays, and he did an unpotting demonstration a couple of meetings ago. And it was absolutely astonishing to see it. This great mat of bulbs and roots that he was fetching out. Now, this was one that was supposed to be Tongariro. That's the bulb it grew last year, and those are 2 new growths from which it will try and flower and grow a new bulb. Pleiones are unlike most orchids. You start off with a bulb, so it has to create that bulb and plump it up in one season. So you have to feed these things very hard, and it will grow. And the first thing it does is flower. So you'll see this extend, it'll come up and it'll flower. And when it's flowered, the flower drops off, it then pushes a leaf up. And after it's put the leaf up, it then turns the base of this new growth into the next bulb. Now, this has got 2 on. I am hoping that means this is going to produce 2 bulbs next time. They are fairly easy things to look after. What I did last year was I put them in this, rested them in the top, put them in groups by what they were supposed to be, and I then put them on the floor in the conservatory by the door so they got lots of light, but it wasn't too warm because they don't like a lot of heat. And once they'd finished flowering and the roots were going and I was watering it regularly and the temperatures were up overnight temperatures were above about 5 or 6 centigrade, guaranteed, they went outside. Now, they like shaded light. They like a lot of orchids. They don't like direct sunlight. And I've got a spot over the far side of the garden on the path where I can keep these things. It doesn't get an awful lot of sun. It'll get a little bit first thing in the morning as it shines down the path between our house and next door. But after that, as the sun swings round, because we're on the northwest side of the house, so you get afternoon sun in the back garden, and it can be really intense. Where they are, it's sheltered by the fence, and it never really sees all that light. But some of these things were massive. I mean, this was another one of these that was supposed to be Tongariro, and that's, you know, quite a size. If you look at those two, those are quite a size, and this one's actually got 3 new growths. Now, the reason I'm starting to do this now is, one, it's the season to do it, and two, according to Richard, you need to look for small white nodules forming at the base of the new growths. And if you see those, let's see whether I can get it to focus. I can't get it to zoom in so we can see what we're doing. I hope so. There we go. Can you see right down at the base of this growth some little white round dots? Well, those are your root tips. And those are, you've got to be very, very careful with Pleiones. They will not branch. They have one root from each of those, and if the root gets broken, it's pop. So you've got to be quite careful with it. Now, I don't pot mine as deep as some people do. Some people say you pot them about 1/3 deep. Mine sat quite high in the compost as they grew naturally last year, so I'm going to do the same again. I'm more or less going to rest these on the top. They've got quite a broad base, little bit of root left, but basically I'm just going to put these on the top. I'm going to let them do their thing, and when they start putting roots down, that's when you water them a lot. Now, like a lot of these things, when you water and don't water, my very limited experience, and I'm talking very, very limited experience, is you are usually told you don't water them until they've got roots. Now, she's fair enough, because if you start chucking water at them and they've got no way of getting rid of it, you are going to end up with the whole base of the thing going soggy. By the same token, you don't want them completely dry. You want it just barely damp, and no more than barely damp. So you don't want it to go outside, it's going to get rained on or anything like that until those roots are well established. And you'll see it, because they get, with these things, they get really quite long. And they're very shallow rooting, so a lot of them will be running about on the surface of the compost. So that's put a good few handfuls of that. I'm going to use Burnham's Orchid Seedling Mix, which it says is a mixture of fine bark, peat and perlite, ideal for young plants, and fine rooting orchids like Pleiones and Calanthes. Now, I have found that although Pleiones do extremely well in this, a lot of others don't. It is very water retentive. Now, for Pleiones, that's great. You're going to have lots of roots, and you're going to have this is nice and damp. I'm not going to need to water this. This is damp in the bag, so that's going to be absolutely fine. A little bit more in, but all I'm going to do with these is I'm going to put them in, and I'm going to try and get them so that the bulb is near the edge of the pot. I'm just going to press it down gently, put a little bit of stuff around it, and just firm it in ever so gently. I don't want to bury it. I don't want to get these down. The reason I'm doing this now rather than waiting a little bit longer, which some people have suggested I should, is because when I've been checking these, I get the impression that these new growths are beginning to extend anyway. So while I'm doing this little bit, which is not particularly interesting, I don't think, and I'm going to put in, that's what they are. Those are nominally Tongareros. Now these are what's known as bulblets, and sometimes you get these forming on top of the old bulbs, because the old bulbs die at the end of the season, they shrivel up, and that's a bulblet that's got a new growth on it. I don't know how well you can see that. That's actually got a new growth on it. So there's a fair chance that that will do something. How much, I don't know. I'm just going to put it in and we'll see what happens. These two, oh, that's got a new growth on as well. So that's likely to produce me a new bulb, and so's that one. So those, out of the two that I actually got last year, I've now got 5 that are showing signs of new growths, and I've just put them in deep enough so they're stable and no more than that. Now the winter treatment, because that typical of terrestrial orchids, these things want to be dormant for several months. They grow right the way through the summer, and then when you get into the autumn, the leaves die off, and when the leaves have died off, the roots have died off, so you then have to dry them off. I brought them inside, put them in the garage, let them dry off, and then when you've taken most of the roots off, you put them in the fridge, because you've got to keep them around 4 or 5 degrees to simulate their natural winter. And to do that, I had I was going to put them in a Tupperware box in plastic bags, and when I talked to some of the Pleiones growers at the group last year, they said, "Oh no, don't do that." And Richard, they say, the guy that's done this commercially, said, "No, what these plants do, even though the bulbs are dormant, they still breathe. You mustn't cover them up any more than you've got to, and you must use a paper bag so that the bag lets any moisture, any gas that they produce out of the bag, otherwise they'll die over the winter." Which is what I did. And instead of putting the lid on the Tupperware box in the fridge, because it just sat in our ordinary fridge, I just left the top off. So it was full of paper bags with these Pleiones bulbs in, and it was just in the fridge with everything else. And the fact that the door was being opened and closed meant that any build-up of gas that might have been there, because the air was moving around, that was fine. Now these were supposed to be Vivaldi. They look to me exactly the same as Tongariro. That one has only grown 1 new growth, but I'm going to do exactly the same with that. I'm going to put that there, just let it sit. It's got a nice broad base, so I'm just going to rest it, more or less rest it on top of the compost. We've got one here with 2. So again, put the new growths to the middle, so the bulbs have got room to develop. This one again has 2, nice broad base. So you can see that even though they perhaps didn't get perfect conditions because they were just stuck outside, and sometimes when we had a lot of rain it was very difficult to actually fertilise them because, and there's a small bulb that again has produced bulbs. So again, started off with 2 bulbs last year. This year I've got 4, and that one was nominally Vivaldi. There's another one in there yet. And there we are. That's a bulblet. Absolutely no signs of anything. There's no, but I might as well put it in and see if anything happens. Sometimes apparently they will put some roots out, and they can grow into a proper bulb. Last ones to go in here. These were supposed to be Rossini. Again, very similar to bulbs what we had before. Great big new growth. So I'm going to do these exactly the same and just put them in deep enough so they're stable and no more. Lovely big fat bulb there. But only 1 new growth. But even so, you start off with 2, and we're going to end up with more, and you can end up really with quite a lot. Another small one with a new growth, so never mind, it might not be the greatest new growth in the world, but we might get some. Let me put that one there, I think. And then we've got this one, which you've got 2 new growths on, 3 new growths on. So that's an absolute beaut. So really, that's it. That's potted the first batch of Pleiones. They can just sit now and do their own thing. I'll put them, say, down by the door. I will only water them once every 2 or 3 weeks when this compost is really dried out. But once they decide they're going to go, they move quite fast. The Barcinas, which I bought, which are winter flowering ones, they're well over, they're flowering. In fact, let me go and get one quick. I'll take my microphone off. So I hope there's not been too much of a ruffle and a bang from that. Right, let's try again. There we go. Now then, oh dear, paper bag's in the way, excuse me. Right, this is what Pleiones look like after they've flowered. This is Barcina, which as I say is a primary hybrid. It's a winter flowering plant. Now this one has had 3 new growths. This one flowered. The other 2 tried to flower, but both of them aborted. You can see they're putting up these rather strange looking leaves. They're quite pleated, but that's natural, that's how they come. These have got 2 leaves on, some of them only have 1. But what that'll do now, you can already see the old bulb beginning to shrink. But what these will do now, you've got lots of roots coming. These can take a lot of water now. And these are going to push on, they're going to get a little bit taller probably, and then right down here at the base you'll see the new bulbs develop. So I bought 2 bulbs from Richard at the Orchid Society. Next year I'm likely to have at least 6, and the year after that, goodness knows, because Pleiones can get very prolific, and we get bags of Pleiones going, really very, very nice plants. At the Society every year. So, okay, I'm going to have to go in a minute, go and meet the boss in Derby. Right, back for the last round. It's later in the afternoon, so the light may not be quite as good. I hope it'll do us. And I'm going to do the last few. Apologies if the previous segment is quite badly focused. I'm hoping that this will be better. I've changed the focusing array to something else, and I'm hoping that it will stay in focus better than it was, but we can only try it and see. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I'll have to try something else. Okay, so the first one is one called Mauna Loa. That's it? I think so. Difficult to see from here. Right. Now all these are much smaller bulbs. They always were much smaller, and the whole thing was a bit smaller. So we've got a bulblet which doesn't look great, but it has got a bit of a nub on it, so we can only put that in and see how we go. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then we've got that one, which I think you can see has got quite a nice spike on. And this is what I meant in one of the other ones when I said that these spikes, even though they've been in the fridge, are starting to push on. Again, I'll see if I can zoom it in a little bit, just temporarily, to try and get it. But can you see how the outer sheathing has sort of been peeled back? Well, I think that's because it's been trying to sprout. So this time we've only got 2 little bulbs in this one. So I'm doing all 3 of these in pots, like the Barcenas are. I've set the pots up exactly the same as I did the others. They are half full of bark, and then with Burnham's orchid seedling mix over the top. Now this one is the last one that I bought, and I bought this at RHS Chatsworth last June, and it was in bloom, so it's very, very, very late for a Pleiones. It should have been well over by then. It was not identified, but it was absolutely gorgeous. I sent a picture of it to a guy who runs a Pleiones website, and he couldn't identify it directly. He said he thought the nearest thing that it looked like was one called Krakatoa, but he didn't think it was exactly that one either. So it was a funny old setup. There were little bits all over. So we've got 3 very small little bulblets to go in, but one of those bulblets has got a new growth. I don't know how well that's showing up, but there's a little tiny new growth on the side there, so put that in and give it room to come. Put that towards the middle. I'm having to plant the bulblets a little bit further down than the bulbs because they haven't got the base area. I don't know what's going to happen with these. I've not grown Pleiones before last year at all, so I'm not sure what's happening now. This is sort of a middle-sized bulb. We've got a small nub on the side of that. These roots are dead, which is exactly what you would expect from a Pleiones that's coming out of winter dormancy. So that's in there, and we'll see what comes of that one. This is the best of all the bulbs on this one, and that's got quite a nice new growth on it, but only the one as far as I can see. So never mind, we've got some there, and it is a very, very pretty flower, so it would be nice to see what happens with that. So that's another one just put together. As I say, I'm hoping against hope that these are going to stay in focus a lot better than the last lot did. Now I hope that the previous segment, although it's not very well done, there's enough in there to be of interest even so. But this is another one. This is called Iretsu or Iratsu Cheryl, well-known registered hybrid. Another small one, and we've got one big bulb and several bulblets. Well, that bulb has got quite a nice spike. In fact, it's got 2 spikes on that, so that's nice. That can go in there, I think, like that. So I don't want to bury it too deep. I don't want to risk getting any damp into that new shoot, because then if I lose that, I've lost everything. It's all over with. Now that's a piece of bark. Have we got anything left? No, nothing left in the bottom of that paper bag. So all we got now is 2 very small bulblets that might do something or might not. We can only wait and see. Probably not, I suspect. And then we've got one that's a little bit bigger that actually does have a new growth on the side. So who knows what we're going to end up with here, but well, we'll just have to wait and see. It's one of the great things about growing orchids, isn't it, when you do your best and then something happens and you learn by it and on you go again. So that's all of my Pleiones, however you pronounce it, I'm never quite sure, all potted up. As I said earlier, I'm not going to water them. The compost, as it's come out of the bag, is plenty damp enough. You don't water them beyond keeping the top of the compost very, very slightly moist until it starts putting roots down. And they don't really start putting roots down seriously until the flower spike is at least well on its way, if not open. So you have to be quite careful with watering these from scratch. It's why they can't go straight outside, even though the conditions might be suitable. If it's going to rain a lot, then you'll kill them. So hopefully between all this lot we've got something that is of interest, useful perhaps to people who are thinking about growing Pleiones. They're not hard things to do. The thing is, you've got to keep them cool and light to start with to get them going. The flowers are very pretty. They last 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps, no more than that. And then that dies, and then you're watching the bulbs grow, and they'll do that all the way around to September, October. And once the risk of frost's gone and the overnight temperatures are going to be more like 5 or 6 than 1 or 2, they can go outside in a shady spot and get lots of rainwater and what have you, and they'll do fine. The leaves get quite large, so it's all good stuff. But I did have some problem with something like snails last year. Snails were sort of nibbling at them. I put some slug pellets in some little housing which I bought, which seemed to do quite a lot of good. But they can attract slugs and snails, so you've got to be a little bit cute. But anyway, I hope that's been useful or interesting, or not too boring at the very least. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.